They were already holding my son's arm when I stepped outside. 2 uniformed cops, and HOA president standing behind them with her arms crossed, and my 12-year-old trying not to cry. She said calmly, almost proudly, "He's being removed for safety reasons." That's when I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a setup. Let me rewind a few hours. We moved into that neighborhood because it looked quiet. Clean lawns, fake smiles, the kind of place where people wave but never mean it. I kept my job private. No uniforms, no badges, no explanation. I'd learned a long time ago that authority attracts problems when civilians want control. My son, Ethan, is autistic, high-functioning, brilliant with numbers, hates loud noises, and sometimes paces outside at night to calm himself down. He never hurts anyone, never damages anything. He just walks the same short loop on the sidewalk with his headphones on. Apparently that was enough to make the HOA president nervous. Her name was Linda. Mid-50s, always carried a clipboard like it was a weapon. She started with notes on our door about loitering concerns, then emails about unsupervised minors, then complaints about suspicious behavior. I responded politely, explained his condition, offered documentation, asked for basic human decency. She ignored all of it. Instead, she escalated. That morning, Ethan had been pacing in front of our house, headphones on, hoodie up, humming quietly to himself. Linda saw him from across the street and decided today was the day she'd take control. She called the police. Not for noise, not for trespassing, but for child endangerment and neglect. By the time I got home from a quick supply run, the patrol cars were already there. Linda was explaining, loudly, how my son was mentally unstable, how he was a danger to himself and others, how she was acting in the best interest of the community. She even used the phrase protective custody. That's when I walked up and saw my son being physically handled. I asked one simple question. "Why are you touching my child?" One of the officers said, "Sir, we received a report that this minor is being neglected and may need to be removed temporarily." Linda smirked. Actually smirked. She said, "The HOA has authority here. We can't allow unsafe situations." I knelt in front of Ethan, looked him in the eyes, and told him quietly, "You're okay. Don't move. Daddy's got this." Then I stood up. I showed the officers my ID. The color drained from one of their faces almost instantly. He read it twice, then a third time. Then he stepped back. The other officer leaned in, confused, until he saw it too. "United States Marshals Service. Chief Deputy." Linda laughed nervously and said, "That doesn't change anything. This is an HOA matter." That was the moment I realized how far she'd gone. Because now this wasn't just harassment. She had weaponized the police against a disabled child. And she had no idea what kind of storm she'd just walked into. I told the officers calmly and clearly that my son was not being removed, that the call contained false statements, and that they were standing on private property, responding to a civil HOA dispute. One officer nodded slowly. Linda started shouting. She said I was intimidating them, that I was abusing my position, that she would report me to the federal government. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten anyone. I simply said, "Ma'am, you just made a report that can permanently destroy a family. If anything happens to my son, this becomes a federal matter." The silence after that was loud. The officers released Ethan immediately. Linda's face went white, and that's when I told her very quietly, "You should call your lawyer, because I'm calling mine." She still thought she could talk her way out of it. She was wrong. Very, very wrong. I could feel the tension in the air, thick like smoke. My son was still trembling, glancing nervously at the door, half expecting them to storm back in. But I wasn't about to let fear dictate the situation. I walked over, putting a protective hand on his shoulder, and told him they won't be coming back. Not while I'm standing here. Meanwhile, across the street, Linda HOA Karen herself was making phone calls. Her fury was palpable, and I could see the veins in her neck pulsating with every word she barked into the phone. She was probably trying to pull some strings, get more so-called officers to descend on my property. But she didn't realize that calling in reinforcements wouldn't intimidate a U.S. Marshals chief. I grabbed my keys and walked toward the driveway. My patrol SUV gleamed in the sunlight, a silent reminder that I wasn't just a parent, I was law enforcement. Every move I made was calculated. Every step was a statement. I wasn't about to let a self-important HOA Karen dictate what happened on my property, especially when it involved my child. Suddenly, the neighborhood dogs started barking. I had trained them well. They were loyal, observant, and protective. Linda froze when she realized the bark wasn't just noise, it was a warning. My K9s were on alert, circling strategically, their eyes fixed on every potential threat. She tried to back away, but her pride made her hesitate. I sat my son in the SUV, buckled him in, and locked the doors. I wanted to make it absolutely clear that no one was getting near him. Just as I started the engine, my phone buzzed. It was a call from the local police. My heart sank for a split second, then I remembered who I was. Calmly, I answered, "Yes, this is Marshal Chief U.S." My tone was firm, unwavering. "I'm aware of the situation. Any further attempt to remove my son without my consent will be considered obstruction of justice. Are we clear?" There was silence on the other end. They knew I wasn't bluffing. I hung up and looked in the rearview mirror. Linda was pacing, muttering under her breath, trying to figure out how to salvage her failed operation. She had underestimated me, and that mistake would cost her more than she could imagine. For the first time that morning, my son smiled faintly. He realized we were safe, at least for now. But I knew the battle wasn't over. Karen's arrogance wouldn't let her walk away quietly. This was far from the last confrontation, but it was a clear message. No one messes with my family. And no one, no HOA, no rogue officers, no Karen gets to threaten my child under my watch. By the time I drove off, the street was quiet again, the chaos temporarily subdued. But in my mind, I was already planning the next move, because in this game, the stakes were higher than property disputes. They were about protecting what mattered most. The tension had reached its peak. The HOA authorities had overstepped every boundary imaginable, storming onto my property and trying to forcefully take my son. I stayed calm, my training kicking in. My son was safe behind me, and every muscle in my body was ready to protect him. I stepped forward, flashing my U.S. Marshals badge with authority. "Step back. You have no legal right here. You are trespassing." My voice carried the weight of the law and decades of experience enforcing it. The HOA cops hesitated, clearly realizing they had underestimated me. One of them tried to argue, citing some ridiculous HOA regulation. I raised an eyebrow and calmly explained federal law and the full consequences of unlawfully detaining a minor. Their faces went pale. The realization hit. They had just challenged a U.S. Marshals chief and the law was not on their side. Meanwhile, my security cameras recorded everything. Within minutes, the local police, already familiar with my credentials, arrived to witness the chaos. They sided immediately with me, confirming the illegality of the HOA's actions. The HOA officers were now facing potential criminal charges, all caught on tape. I turned to my son and put an arm around him. "Always remember," I said firmly, "standing up for what's right doesn't make you a hero. It makes you a protector." By the end of the day, the HOA learned a hard lesson. Never underestimate someone who literally enforces the law. The attempted abduction ended in humiliation for them and absolute safety for my family. My son hugged me tightly, and for the first time the tension melted into relief and laughter. Justice had been served my way, and as I watched them leave, heads down, I knew one thing for certain: no HOA, no matter how bold, would ever mess with my family again.